I took my wife's handbag to an old leather shop near the harbor just to fix a stuck zipper. But when I came back, the owner didn't hand it over. His face was pale. He locked the door and whispered, "Call the police now. And don't tell your wife." Then he opened a hidden compartment at the bottom of the bag. Inside were scattered photos and a paper listing every step to destroy me. When I read the final line, my legs nearly gave out. The woman sleeping beside me every night had already planned how to make me disappear. It means more than you know that you chose to stay. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining from today? Let's see how far this story travels. Note, certain details in this story are fictional, shaped for storytelling and reflection. Names and settings are not drawn from any specific source, but what this story carries, I hope, is something that stays with you. The zipper had been fighting her for 3 days. I noticed it the way I notice most things, quietly, without making a fuss. Tuesday morning, Diane wrestled with her burgundy leather handbag at the kitchen counter, jaw-set fingers working the pull tab back and forth in short, frustrated jerks. Wednesday, same thing, except this time, she let out a sharp breath through her nose and shoved the bag onto the hallway shelf like it had personally offended her. "Let me take a look," I offered, setting down my coffee mug. She pulled it away before my hand got close. "It's fine, Harold. Leave it." "It's not fine. You've been fighting that thing for 3 days. I said leave it." Her voice carried that particular edge, not quite anger, not quite warning, somewhere in between. The tone that after 43 years I had learned to respect without fully understanding. So I left it. I sat back down at the kitchen table with my coffee and the morning paper, but I wasn't reading. I was watching her from the corner of my eye, the way I used to watch a faulty valve assembly on the line, cataloging the problem, turning it over in my mind. 35 years as a precision mechanical engineer had wired me a certain way. Small details had a habit of meaning something larger. A misaligned gear tooth. A hairline fracture you could only see if the light hit it right. A zipper that wouldn't cooperate. Diane set the bag on the hallway shelf, adjusted it so the handles draped just so, and walked into the bedroom without looking back. I sat with my coffee and thought about Thomas. He hadn't called in 3 months, not unusual for a man pushing 40 with his own life in Boston, but I missed him the way you miss something you can't quite name. I thought about Claire, who lived 20 minutes away and still managed to feel like the one person in the world I could count on to answer the phone. And then I looked at that bag on the shelf and I thought, if I got the zipper fixed, Diane would come home to something that worked. A small thing. The kind of small thing that keeps a household running, keeps a person feeling looked after, keeps 43 years feeling like they mean something. I folded the newspaper. I looked at the bag. She'll be happy when she sees it, I thought. That's enough reason. She left for the grocery store at 9 o'clock, sharp the way she always did on Wednesday mornings. I heard the garage door grind open, heard her car back down the driveway, heard the automatics closed or pull the door back down. The house went quiet. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just listening to that quiet. The grandfather clock in the living room, the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen, the sound of the neighborhood settling into its mid-morning routines. Then I took the bag off the shelf. I carried it to the kitchen table and examined the zipper properly for the first time. Sure enough, 2 teeth near the midpoint had bent inward, probably from being forced one too many times in the wrong direction. The slider itself was slightly torqued. A drop of sewing machine oil and a careful hand with a pair of needle-nose pliers would do it. But I didn't want to risk scratching the leather or getting oil on the lining. This bag was good leather. It deserved a professional. I wrapped it in a canvas tote bag from the hook by the back door. Before I picked up my car keys, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Thomas. "Free this morning. Call when you get a chance, son." I set the phone face up on the counter and waited about 30 seconds. No reply. He was probably already buried in whatever had buried him for the last 3 months. I pocketed the phone, picked up the tote bag, and walked through to the garage. The Volvo was cool and smelled faintly of the pine air freshener Claire had clipped to the vent last Christmas. I backed out slowly, the way I have done every morning for the past 11 years, in this house, checking the mirror twice before pulling into Westbrook Drive. It was a 15-minute drive to the old port, easy parking on a Wednesday morning. I had been to Leary Leather maybe 40 times over the years. A new belt buckle here, a briefcase restitched there, a pair of dress shoes resold for a retirement dinner I had not particularly wanted to attend. Vince Leary knew my face the way neighborhood tradesmen know the faces of reliable customers. Not friendship exactly, something quieter and more durable than friendship. I drove with the heat on low and the radio off. I'll be back before she is, I thought. She'll never know it left the house. The bell above the door of Leary Leather gave its familiar two-note jangle as I pushed inside, and the smell hit me the way it always did. Rich, dark, faintly animal, the smell of things built to last. The shop occupied a narrow storefront on Exchange Street 1 block from the waterfront, sandwiched between a coffee roaster and a frame shop. Vincent Leary had run it for 26 years, without changing much about the layout or the signage, which I had always considered a mark in his favor. He was at the front counter when I came in, bent over a woman's boot with a stitching awl, and he looked up with the unhurried expression of a man who has never needed to perform enthusiasm for customers. "Harold," he set the awl down. "Morning, Vince. Haven't seen you since March, April." "April," I said. Resoled the brown cap toes. "Right." He nodded, wiping his hands on the leather apron he wore, tied low around his waist. "What have you got?" I set the canvas tote on the counter and drew out the burgundy bag. "Zippers binding, 2 teeth bent near center sliders, a little torqued. I don't want to force it and crack the leather around the pull." Vince took the bag with the practiced hands of a man who reads objects the way other men read faces. He turned it over, ran his thumb along the zipper track, pressed lightly at the corners. "Good piece," he said more to himself than to me. "This is full-grain cowhide mid-range tannery work, not cheap." He looked up. "Your wife's? Her birthday's in December. Thought I'd get it working properly before she noticed I'd taken it." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. "Sentimental." "Practical," I said. He turned the bag over one more time, examining the bottom, then set it on the counter. "I can have it done by 3. Oil the track, ease the teeth back, realign the slider. $40. "That's fine. Come back at 3. I'll call you if it's earlier." I buttoned my jacket, nodded once, and headed back toward the door. Behind me, I heard him carry the bag through to the back workroom, heard the sound of a stool scraping across a concrete floor, heard him settle in to work. The bell above the door jangled again as I stepped back out into the October cold. The harbor was visible at the end of the block, gray-green and flat under a low sky. A pair of seagulls argued over something near the waterline. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, turned my collar up, and walked back to where I had parked the car. Done before 3, I thought. Home before she knows. My phone rang at 2:47 in the afternoon. I was in the living room with a cup of reheated coffee and the crossword I had abandoned that morning, half listening to the wind picking up outside. Diane was upstairs. I could hear her moving around the familiar creak of the floorboard near the closet, the sound of drawers opening and closing. I looked at the screen. Vince Leary. "Harold." His voice was different, flat in a way that had nothing to do with his usual economy of words. "I need you to come back to the shop." "Everything okay with the bag?" A pause. Short, but I felt it. "Just come. Come now. Don't bring your wife." I set the crossword down on the coffee table. I looked at the ceiling at the sound of Diane moving around above me, and I kept my voice completely even. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. I told Diane I was running an errand. She didn't ask what kind. She rarely did. The bell above Leary Leather's door sounded different the second time, or maybe I was just listening to it differently. Vince was standing at the front counter when I came in, but he didn't greet me the way he had that morning. He just turned and walked toward the back workroom, and I followed him through the narrow corridor that smelled of leather conditioner and old wood, past the shelves of tools and spools of waxed thread, into the small room where he did his serious work. He had set everything on his workbench under the magnifying lamp. The burgundy bag was open, its lining turned back, the bottom panel removed and laid flat beside it, and on a clean square of brown paper arranged with a care that told me Vince had not known what else to do with them were 3 things I had not put there. 4 photographs printed on standard copy paper in full color. Diane. A man I did not recognize, mid-40s, dark jacket, the kind of unremarkable face that would disappear in any crowd. The Portland Harbor Hotel lobby in 2 of the shots. A hotel corridor in the other 2. The images were clear. There was no ambiguity about what they documented. A single sheet of paper folded in quarters, unfolded now, and smooth flat, typed in a clean small font. 12 numbered steps under the heading Transition Plan. I read the first 3 lines and felt something cold settle behind my sternum. Step 4. Establish pattern of cognitive concerns with family physician, minimum 60 days documentation. Step 9. Execute financial transfer authorization. At the bottom of the page underlined target completion, December 15th, 2025. And a small square of notepaper, handwritten 2 lines. Plan B stairs or meds, whichever comes first. I read everything twice. The room did not change. The lamp was still warm. The smell of leather was still in the air. Vince stood to my left with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, not watching me read, looking instead at the wall, giving me what privacy he could in an 8x10 room. I folded the notepaper back along its original crease. I set it down beside the photographs. I looked at the date on the transition plan. No date of creation, only the December 15th deadline, and I did the math without trying to. 9 weeks. Give or take. Harold! Vince's voice had dropped to something close to a murmur. You need to call the police. Right now, don't go home tonight. I looked at the checklist, then the photographs, then the 2-line note with its casual handwritten mention of stairs and medication. I thought about what a single phone call to the police would produce at this moment. Diane would say the photographs were old, taken out of context. She would say the checklist was nothing, a private journal entry, a worry list, the kind of thing any spouse writes when they're frightened about their partner's health. She would say the note was a misunderstanding, and she would say it calmly with the quiet confidence of a woman who had spent considerable time thinking about exactly this kind of scenario. I had 4 photographs and a piece of paper. I needed more than that. Not yet, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me slightly. Not yet, Vince. He looked at me then, really looked. You understand what that says? I understand exactly what it says. Then what are you waiting for? I picked up the folded notepaper, one more time, looked at the 2 lines, set it back down. Stairs or meds, whichever comes first, written in the same handwriting that had signed 43 years of birthday cards. I'm waiting, I said, until she doesn't have a single door left to walk out of. She was already asleep when I got home, or she was pretending to be. After 43 years, I still could not always tell the difference, and that thought, which once would have seemed merely philosophical, now carried a different kind of weight. I undressed in the dark, moved to my side of the bed, lay down on top of the covers for a moment before pulling them back and getting underneath. The mattress shifted slightly with my weight. Diane did not move. Her breathing was slow, and even the particular rhythm I had fallen asleep beside for decades. I looked at the ceiling. The streetlight outside pushed a thin line of amber through the gap in the curtains, running diagonally across the plaster like a fault line. I tracked it with my eyes, and I did not think about how I felt. I thought about what I knew. Item 1, there was a hidden compartment in her bag, constructed to be undetectable under normal handling. That compartment had existed long enough to accumulate 4 photographs and 2 written documents. This was not impulsive. This was planned. Item 2. The transition plan had 12 steps. 4 of them had already been completed based on what I could infer. Step 4, establishing a pattern of cognitive concerns with a family physician, was already underway, or I had no reason to assume otherwise. 60 days of documentation the plan specified. That meant it had started in October, at the latest possibly earlier. Item 3, Plan B stairs or meds, whichever comes first. 7 words, written in the same hand that had left me notes on the kitchen counter for 4 decades. Dinner in the fridge. Back by 8. Don't forget your appointment. The same hand. I did not let myself stay on that for long. Staying on it would not help me. I thought about Thomas asleep in Boston, who knew nothing. I thought about Claire 20 minutes away, who knew nothing. I thought about what a grieving widow looked like to the people around her. And I thought about how well Diane understood the people around her. And I thought about December 15th, 9 weeks. I could not afford to be angry. Anger was a luxury that required safety, and I was not safe. I was lying in my own bed, in my own house, with 62 days left on a deadline I was not supposed to know about, next to the person who had written it. The thing to do, the only thing to do, was think like an engineer, identify the system, map the components, find every point of failure, then build a counter system that was stronger, more precise, and invisible until the moment it needed to be seen. I needed 3 things. Physical evidence, I had it. Financial proof, I did not have it yet. Medical proof that I was exactly as sharp as I had always been, that the cognitive concerns narrative was fiction, I did not have that yet either. All three had to exist simultaneously, and all three had to be irrefutable. Diane's breathing did not change. The amber line on the ceiling did not move. I closed my eyes, I thought. I listened to her breathe, and I started making a list. Vince unlocked the side door of Leary Leather at 7:10, still pulling on his work apron. I had texted him at 6:30. He had replied with 2 words, side door, 7, no questions. I had always liked that about him. The shop was cold inside the heating not yet running for the day, and the workbench lamp threw a small circle of yellow light in the back room, while everything else stayed gray. Vince had been there ahead of me. The photographs and the 2 documents were already laid out on the brown paper square, exactly as he had left them the previous afternoon, as if he had known I would come back and had not wanted to disturb anything in the meantime. Beside them was a USB drive, matte black, the kind you could buy at any drugstore for a few dollars. I photographed everything last night, Vince said. He did not sound like he had slept. Full resolution, time-stamped, it's all on there. He pushed the drive across the bench toward me. I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. The bag's done, he said. Zipper runs clean. I realigned the slider and worked the teeth back without any damage to the leather. He paused. It looks like nothing happened to it. That's exactly what it needs to look like. He watched me take the photographs and fold them carefully back into the original creases, watched me fold the transition plan, the same way watched me tuck the small handwritten note between them. I wrapped the 3 items in a piece of tissue paper from his supply shelf and slid them into my inside jacket pocket alongside the USB. Put the bag back in the canvas tote, I said. I'll take it home and get it back on the shelf before she's downstairs. Vince was quiet for a moment, his hands resting flat on the workbench. Then he said, Harold, what are you planning to do? I looked at him. He was 55 years old and had spent half his life working with his hands in a trade that rewarded patience and precision, and I thought he probably understood more about this kind of situation than most people would have given him credit for. I'm going to wait, I said, until I have everything, and then I'm going to make sure she has nowhere left to go. And in the meantime, you're going to go home and act like nothing happened. Yes. He picked up the burgundy bag and placed it carefully in the canvas tote. He smoothed the handles so they lay flat. You're a cooler man than I am, he said. I'm a careful man, I said. There's a difference. I took the tote from him, thanked him, and went back out the side door into the October morning. The streets of the old port were just beginning to wake up. A delivery truck idling on 4th Street, a woman in a yellow jacket walking a dog along the waterfront, the harbor pale and still between the piers. I drove home. Diane's car was still in the garage. I went in through the kitchen, hung the canvas tote on the hook by the back door, took the bag out and set it on the hallway shelf, with the handles draped exactly as they had been when she left it there 2 days before. I had been home for 4 minutes when I heard her moving around upstairs. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the burner. By the time the water boiled, I had the mugs out, the coffee measured, and the newspaper open to the page I had been reading when Vince called me the day before. She'll come downstairs, I thought, and everything will look exactly like it always does. I intended to keep it that way for as long as I needed to. She came downstairs at 8:23. I heard her on the stairs before I saw her, the familiar creak of the 3rd step from the bottom, the soft drag of her slippers across the hardwood. I already had the coffee poured, 2 mugs the way we'd done it every morning for more years than I cared to count. Morning, I said, not looking up from the newspaper. Morning. She pulled out her chair and wrapped both hands around the mug, the way she always did when October hadn't fully warmed the house yet. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. We had always been that kind of household, no obligation to fill the quiet before the 2nd cup. I turned a page of the newspaper and read nothing on it. I might call Claire, she said, see if she wants to come Saturday. That'd be nice. Thomas probably won't make it until Christmas. Probably not. She sighed not unhappily, just the way you acknowledge distance without dwelling on it. Then she reached for the cream, and her eyes moved just for a single second to the hallway shelf. 1 second, no more. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't habit. It was the look of a person confirming that a lock is still engaged, quick, precise, satisfied. Then she looked back at her coffee and stirred it slowly, and her face was as open and calm as any other Wednesday morning. The maple is really something this year, she said, nodding toward the backyard window. It is, I agreed. I got up and refilled her mug without being asked. She smiled and thanked me. We sat together in the warm kitchen light, and I kept my face perfectly still, and I thought about 9 weeks, and I thought she just checked on it. She doesn't know it's already been opened. More toast, I asked. No, I'm fine. She was looking at the maple again, genuinely pleased by it. Not yet, I told myself. Be patient. Be exactly who she expects you to be. She left at 2:15 to meet a friend for lunch. I watched her car back out of the driveway and waited until the sound of the engine disappeared completely before I moved. I went to my study, the small room Diane called my clutter room, and rarely entered, closed the door, and opened the laptop. I plugged in Vince's USB drive and pulled up the photographs first. The man in the dark jacket was maybe 45. Broad shoulders, unremarkable face, the kind of confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. 2 shots in the Portland Harbor Hotel lobby, 2 in an upstairs corridor. Clear images. No ambiguity. Then I opened the transition plan. I had read it twice already, once in shock at Vince's workbench, once lying in the dark. I read it a third time now, with a pencil in my hand, the way I used to read a technical schematic I needed to reverse engineer. Step 4. Stopped me cold. Establish pattern of cognitive concerns with family physician, minimum 60 days prior to filing. That meant Dr. Pierce had already been approached, or was about to be. I underlined it twice. Step 7. Execute durable power of attorney financial. That required my signature, or something that looked enough like it. Step 12. Final arrangement no later than December 15th, 2025. I turned to a fresh page of my legal pad and wrote 3 lines. Layer 1, physical evidence, done. Layer 2, financial proof. Need bank records, need documentation of forgery. Layer 3, medical proof, independent evaluation. Need physician not connected to Diane. At the bottom, I wrote 1 word and underlined it 3 times simultaneously. 1 layer alone could be explained away. 2 might be framed as a misunderstanding, but 3 delivered together from 3 independent sources with a paper trail that had been building for weeks. That was a structure that didn't fall when you pushed on any single wall. She has 12 steps, I thought, locking the legal pad in the fireproof box at the back of my filing cabinet. I only need 3. 2 nights later, Diane went to bed early. She said she had a headache. She kissed me on the cheek the way she always did, and I listened to her footsteps on the stairs until the bedroom door closed. I sat with my book for another hour, then went up to retrieve a novel I had left on my nightstand. That's when I noticed the vanity drawer, not fully closed, a 1/4 inch of navy blue showing at the corner. I stood very still. Diane's breathing from the bed was slow and even. I lifted the folder out and took it to the bathroom, closed the door, turned the tap on low, and opened it under the vanity light. Petition for appointment of guardian, State of Maine, probate court. In Maine, a guardianship petition asks a judge to declare someone legally incapacitated, unable to make their own decisions about health, finances, or property. Once a court grants it, that person loses the legal right to refuse medical treatment, manage their own money, or sign any document on their own behalf. The respondent listed on this form was Harold James Bennett. The form was 80% complete. Diane had filled in my date of birth, our address, the children's names. The section describing my alleged incapacity cited progressive memory impairment, impaired judgment, and inability to manage financial affairs. 3 careful paragraphs written by someone who had thought hard about what a judge would find credible. 2 lines remained blank. 1 required a physician's signature. 1 required a filing date. Clipped inside the cover was a business card, Martin Klein, Esquire. On the back, in Diane's handwriting, ready when you are. I stood at that counter for a long time, with the water running softly beside me. She didn't need me dead, not yet. She needed me declared legally incapable first. Every door locked from the outside, every signature invalidated every objection I might raise, rendered meaningless by a court order. After that, Plan B stairs or meds, whichever comes first, required no staging at all. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, 1/4 inch gap at the corner, exactly right. I went downstairs and sat in the living room, with the book open on my lap, and didn't read a single word. Tomorrow, I thought, 6 in the morning, from the car, 3 blocks away. Evelyn Hart is going to answer that phone. I left the house at 5:55 in the morning. Diane was still asleep. I dressed in the dark, took my jacket from the hook by the back door, and walked 3 blocks down Westbrook Drive to where the street curved and the houses thinned out. The October air was sharp and raw, the sky still a deep charcoal gray, the harbor invisible somewhere beyond the rooftops. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and pulled out my phone. Evelyn Hart had been a real estate attorney 8 years ago, when a commercial property transfer I was involved in went sideways. A boundary dispute, a forged survey. A seller who had decided creative documentation was an acceptable substitute for honesty. She had found the problem in 40 minutes of reading what 2 other lawyers had missed entirely. We had worked together for 3 weeks, and I had left with the clear impression that she thought in systems the same way I did. Not feelings first, structure first. Find where it breaks, then fix it. I found her number and pressed call. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hart, Evelyn, it's Harold Bennett. I don't know if you remember. I remember. No pause, no warmth, no performance of surprise. Just the flat efficiency of someone who filed things properly in their memory. 8 years ago, the Westbrook survey dispute. What's happened? I gave her 3 minutes. No editorializing, no emotion, just the sequence of events in order. The bag Vince, the photographs, the transition plan, the guardianship folder, the note about stairs and medication. I heard her pen moving on paper while I talked. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 10 seconds. I counted. All right, she said. Here's what you do not do. You do not confront her. You do not change your behavior in any way she could notice. You do not move money close accounts or make any financial changes whatsoever. Any of those things could be used against you later. It makes you look reactive or worse, guilty of something yourself. A pause. Can you do that? Yes. There's someone else I want you to think about, she said. Your household accountant. If Diane has been moving assets, the accountant either knows or has been deliberately kept from knowing. Either way, that person is relevant. Her name is Lena Marsh. She's been with us 7 years. I'll look into her quietly. Don't approach her yourself yet. Another pause. Come to my office today. 2 o'clock. Come alone. Don't tell Diane where you're going. Understood. Harold. Her voice shifted just slightly, not softer, but more direct. You did the right thing waiting. Most people don't. I looked out through the windshield at the empty street. A single light had come on in a house 2 doors down. The harbor was beginning to show itself as a pale gray line between the rooftops. I'll be there at 2, I said. I drove home, walked in through the kitchen, and started the coffee. When Diane came downstairs 20 minutes later, I was reading the newspaper. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep, I said. Coffee's ready. She smiled and poured herself a cup, and neither of us said anything else, and the morning continued exactly as it always did. Her office was on the 4th floor of One City Center, a clean angular building 2 blocks from the waterfront. The receptionist showed me to a private conference room, long table, 3 chairs. The blinds angled to keep out the afternoon glare. Evelyn Hart was already inside when I arrived, a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a cup of black coffee she clearly hadn't touched. She was 49 trim, with short gray-streaked hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she had never in her adult life slouched in a chair. She stood when I came in, shook my hand once, and sat back down before I had fully settled into my seat. Walk me through it again, she said. Slower this time. I laid everything out, the photographs, the checklist, the guardianship petition, the Plan B note. I had brought the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop, without being asked, studied the images in silence, read the transition plan twice, and wrote steadily on the legal pad throughout. When I finished, she set her pen down and said, 3 layers. That's what we need. That's what I figured. Physical evidence, you have it. Financial proof, we need bank records, and we need to establish the forgery on the power of attorney before she tries to use it. Medical, we need an independent cognitive evaluation from a physician with no connection to your family. She drew 3 columns on the legal pad and labeled them as she spoke, and all 3 have to be ready at the same time. You understand why? 1 layer is anecdotal, 2 is a dispute, 3 is a case. She looked up at me, and something in her expression shifted, not quite approval, but recognition. Exactly. She tapped the legal pad with her pen. There's 1 more piece. Your accountant, Lena Marsh. I ran a background check this morning. She's clean professionally, no prior issues. But if Diane has been directing her to process irregular transfers, Lena is either complicit or she's a witness who doesn't know she's a witness yet. She paused. I'll approach her through proper channels, not yet but soon. What do I do in the meantime? You go home, Evelyn said flatly. You make dinner, you watch television, you act like a man who has absolutely no idea that anything is wrong. She picked up her coffee, looked at it, put it back down. How long can you do that? I thought about the amber line on the ceiling, about Diane's breathing in the dark, about the breakfast table and the maple tree and 43 years of Wednesday mornings. As long as I need to, I said. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then we have a chance. I stood to leave. At the door I turned back. How long do we have? She glanced at the transition plan on her screen. December 15th was visible at the bottom of the page. 5 weeks, she said. Maybe 6 if she runs into delays. A beat. So, let's not have delays on our end. It started on a Sunday. Small things, quiet things, the kind that leave no mark. We were at the breakfast table when Diane set her mug down and said with a look of gentle concern that was almost perfectly constructed, "Did you remember where you put the car keys last night? You were looking for them for a while." I had not been looking for them. I knew exactly where the keys were on the hook by the back door where they had lived for 11 years. I had put them there myself at 7:15 the previous evening. Found them fine, I said, turning a page of the newspaper. Oh, good. She stirred her coffee. I just worry sometimes. You've seemed a little scattered lately. I said nothing. I kept my eyes on the page. 2 days later, over dinner. I already told you about Sharon's appointment, Harold, last Tuesday. Don't you remember? She had not told me. I was certain of it. I kept a precise mental log of our conversations now, the way I used to track tolerances on a machine component, noting every deviation from spec. She had not mentioned Sharon's appointment on Tuesday or any other day. Must have slipped by me, I said, and picked up my fork. She reached across and touched my hand, soft, concerned. I just think maybe we should talk to Dr. Pierce. Just a checkup, nothing serious. I looked at her hand on mine. Sure, I said. Whatever you think. That night, I sat at my desk with the door closed and wrote it all down. Date, time, exact words, context. Every entry in my own handwriting time-stamped on my phone as a backup. A record she didn't know existed of conversations she thought would dissolve into the ordinary fog of daily life. She was building a version of me, forgetful, uncertain, a man who needed managing. I was building a different record entirely. She's writing me out, I thought, closing the notebook. So I'm going to make sure there's another version of the story, one she can't edit. Diane had yoga every Monday morning from 9:30 to 11. She had kept that schedule without exception for 6 years, which meant I had a 90-minute window, reliable, predictable, and wide enough to work with. I had learned over the past 2 weeks to think about her schedule the way I used to think about maintenance windows on a production line. Every gap was an opportunity. Every predictable absence was a door left open. I left the house at 9:45 and drove to First Harbor Bank on Middle Street. The branch was quiet on a Monday morning, a teller helping an elderly woman near the door, a young man at the far counter filling out deposit slips, the low hum of climate control overhead. I didn't go to a teller. I went to the receptionist near the back and said I needed to speak with someone in fraud prevention, not customer service. Fraud prevention specifically. She gave me a look that was professionally neutral and asked me to wait. Maya Collins came out 4 minutes later. She was 41, with close-cropped natural hair, and the kind of composed, unhurried manner that suggested she had heard most things before and found very few of them surprising. She shook my hand, introduced herself by name and title, Fraud Prevention Specialist, and showed me to a small private office off the main floor. "What can I help you with, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, settling into her chair with a notepad ready. "I have a joint savings account here with my wife," I said. "I have reason to believe there have been unauthorized transactions on that account. I'd like to review the activity for the past 12 months. She typed without looking at the keyboard. "I can pull that up. Can I ask what specifically concerns you? I believe my signature may have been forged on an authorization document." She stopped typing, looked at me directly for the first time. "All right," she said, and her voice had shifted, still professional, but with a new quality of attention underneath it. "I'm going to need you to come back Wednesday. Bring a valid ID and any original signed documents you have from before this year, something we can use as a baseline comparison." She paused. "Can you do that?" "Wednesday at 2, I said. "I'll be here." She walked me back to the lobby, shook my hand again, and said nothing further. I was out the door at 10:43. Diane's yoga class ended at 11. I drove home, parked in the garage, and was sitting in my chair with the newspaper when I heard her car in the driveway 17 minutes later. "How was class?" I called from the living room. "Good," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "Instructor tried a new sequence. My shoulders are going to hate me tomorrow. There's coffee if you want it." "You're a good man, Harold Bennett." She said it lightly, the way you say something you've said 100 times before, moving through the kitchen without stopping. I looked at the newspaper in my hands and said nothing. I just listened to the sound of the cabinet opening, the pour of coffee into a mug, the ordinary music of a Monday morning. Not yet, I thought. 2 more days. Maya had the records ready when I arrived Wednesday at 2 o'clock sharp. The private office felt smaller in the afternoon, the light coming in, flat and gray, through the half-open blinds. She had 2 documents on the desk, each one sealed in a clear protective sleeve, and she had turned her monitor so I could see the screen from my side of the desk. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling up 2 images side by side. "This is your signature from the original joint account agreement in 2019. She pointed to the left image. "And this is the signature on a financial power of attorney authorization filed in August of this year." I looked at both of them. They were close. Someone had put real effort into it. The general shape was right, the loop on the H, the way the double T dropped below the line. But I had signed my name roughly 40,000 times in my life, and I knew exactly what it felt like. The specific angle my wrist naturally carried, the slight rightward lean on the last letters. The 2025 signature leaned differently, by maybe 3 degrees, consistent through the entire signature, which meant it wasn't random variation. It was someone who had practiced from a sample and hadn't been able to fully unlearn their own muscle memory. "The downstroke on every letter angles right," Maya said, tracing it with her pen without touching the sleeve. "Consistent deviation throughout, that's characteristic of someone copying from a model rather than signing naturally." She looked up at me. "Mr. Bennett, in my professional opinion, this signature was not written by the same person." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. "How much has moved?" I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Maya pulled up a transaction summary on her screen and turned it toward me. 4 transfers over 4 months, June through September of this year, each one under $90,000. I looked at the total. $340,000. Why under 90,000? I asked, though I already knew. Federal law requires banks to report cash transactions over $10,000 automatically, she said carefully. Structuring transactions to stay under reporting thresholds is itself a federal offense regardless of where the money came from. Where did it go? A third-party account. We're still identifying it. She held my gaze. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to come back Friday. There are additional steps we need to take, and I want our compliance officer present." A brief pause. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy to hear." I looked at the number on the screen one more time. $340,000. Gone since June while I was living my ordinary life, reading my newspaper, refilling her coffee cup every morning. I'll be here." I called Evelyn from the parking garage before I started the car. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the numbers from memory. 340,004 transfers June through September, each one structured under the reporting threshold. I heard her pen moving before I finished the second sentence. "That structuring is a federal offense," she said the moment I stopped talking. "Bank Secrecy Act. Even if the underlying money was legitimately hers, deliberately breaking up transfers to avoid automatic reporting is a crime in itself." A pause. "This is good, Harold. This is layer 2 taking shape." "There's more," I said. The signature on the power of attorney authorization, Maya Collins, confirmed it's a forgery. Consistent deviation, practiced copy, not my natural hand. Evelyn was quiet for 3 full seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had a new quality. Not excitement exactly, but the focused energy of someone watching a structure come together the way it was designed to. "Forgery on a power of attorney document is a Class C felony in Maine," she said. "That's up to 5 years. Combined with the structuring charges, we're no longer talking about a civil dispute." Another pause. "I'm calling Maya Collins this afternoon. We need a soft freeze on that account, not a full block, not yet. We want Diane to be able to attempt another transaction. We need to catch her in motion." "What does a soft freeze do exactly?" Any transaction over $5,000 gets flagged and held for 48 hours before it clears. Maya notifies us before the money moves. Her voice was flat and precise. Diane won't see any change from her end. She'll think everything is normal, but the next time she tries to move money, we'll know about it before it leaves. I sat in the parking garage and looked at the concrete wall in front of me, the low buzz of the overhead fluorescent light, the smell of cold exhaust and motor oil. "She's going to try again," I said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "She is, and when she does—" She left the sentence open deliberate. "We'll be ready," I said. "Get home," Evelyn said. "Act normal. I'll handle the bank." I started the car, pulled out of the garage onto Middle Street into the flat gray light of a Wednesday afternoon in October, and I drove home the long way down Commercial Street along the waterfront, past the piers, past the harbor, where the boats rocked quietly on the incoming tide. 340,000, I thought, watching the water through the windshield, since June. While I was reading the newspaper and refilling her coffee cup, I turned onto Westbrook Drive and pulled into the garage and sat there for a moment with the engine off. Layer 2, I thought. Done. Vince called me on a Wednesday afternoon in early November, just as the last light was leaving the sky. "I found something," he said, no preamble, no greeting. Just those 3 words in that flat, careful voice I had come to associate with news I didn't want but needed. "Can you come by tomorrow, after hours?" I came the next evening through the side door, the way I always did now. The shop was closed and quiet, the workbench lamp burning its small yellow circle in the back room. Vince was standing at the shelves along the far wall, floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves, lined with ledger books, each one a different shade of brown and tan, each one dated on the spine in his neat handwriting. 26 years of work, cataloged and kept. He pulled one from the middle shelf without hesitating, opened it to a page marked with a strip of blue painter's tape. April 14th, he said, and handed it to me. The entry was in his handwriting, methodical and precise. Burgundy cowhide, handbag medium size. Customer request, re-bottom replace. Lining add, concealed interior compartment per hand-drawn specification. Below that, a description of dimensions and placement. And at the bottom, cash payment. Customer declined to leave name. Female approximately mid-60s. Short silver hair, navy jacket, gold band, ring right hand, 4th finger. I read it twice. April 14th, 6 months before I ever touched that bag. 6 months before the zipper gave me a reason to walk through Vince's front door. "She came in with a sketch," Vince said. He was watching me read, arms crossed, jaw tight. Hand-drawn, precise measurements. She knew exactly what she wanted and exactly where she wanted it. He paused. I thought it was unusual at the time. Women ask for extra pockets. They don't usually come in with architectural drawings. I looked up from the ledger. "You remember her. I remember anyone who pays cash and doesn't give a name." He held my gaze. I remember her specifically because she looked at the finished work for about 30 seconds without touching it, nodded once and left, like she was inspecting a piece of equipment. The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up off the harbor, rattling the sign above the front door. April 14th. I had spent that Saturday afternoon fixing the back fence, the one that had come loose over winter. I remembered it clearly, the particular bite of the spring air, the satisfaction of a straightforward physical task, the smell of treated lumber. I had come inside at 5, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and Diane had been sitting at the table reading a magazine. She had looked up and smiled at me. While I was fixing the fence, she was commissioning a hidden compartment for a plan she had already written out in 12 numbered steps. "I need this ledger," I said. "I made a copy this morning." He reached behind the workbench and produced a sealed envelope. "Original stays with me. Evelyn Hart called yesterday. She said it would work better that way." He handed it to me. "Evidence chain." I took the envelope, looked at it for a moment. "Vince," I said, "I don't know how to—" "Don't," he said simply. He turned back to the shelves and slid the ledger into its place with a quiet final sound. "Just make sure it counts." Evelyn had made the call 2 days earlier. Jordan Reyes, the pharmacist at Eastside Pharmacy on Congress Street, had agreed to speak with me voluntarily before the store opened 7:30 in the morning through the back entrance on the side alley before the day shift came in. Evelyn had been careful about the approach. No subpoena, no official pressure, just a quiet request from a lawyer with a legitimate fraud case and a client whose life might depend on what the pharmacy's records showed. Jordan was 38 with careful eyes and the measured movements of someone who spent their days dealing in precise quantities. He met me at the back door himself, shook my hand, and led me through the stockroom to a small office barely large enough for 2 chairs and a desk. "I pulled the records last night," he said, settling in behind the desk and opening a folder. "Your wife Diane Bennett purchased digoxin on 3 separate occasions: August 28th, September 19th, and October 14th. He looked up. "You are not prescribed digoxin, Mr. Bennett. Your prescription history here shows metoprolol for blood pressure management. That's all." I kept my face still. "What is digoxin prescribed for?" "Heart conditions, atrial fibrillation, heart failure. It regulates heart rhythm." He paused, and I could see him choosing his next words with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was saying. "At therapeutic doses in the right patient, it's an effective medication. At elevated doses in a patient who is not prescribed, particularly a patient already taking metoprolol, the interaction can cause severe bradycardia, meaning the heart slows down. Too much. In a man your age with a history of blood pressure medication, it could present as a cardiac event. Natural causes." He held my gaze without flinching. "Mr. Bennett, I have to ask, did you ever take any medication that you didn't recognize or weren't told about?" Something cold moved through my chest. "Not knowingly," I said carefully. Jordan nodded slowly. He closed the folder and pushed it across the desk toward me, a copy I realized already prepared. The camera above our dispensing counter recorded all 3 purchases. I've flagged the footage with timestamps. He folded his hands on the desk. "I don't know your full situation, but I know what these records look like, and I know what the right thing to do is." I looked at the folder, at 3 dates printed in clean type: August, September, October. While I was reading the newspaper, while I was refilling her coffee cup, while I was fixing fences and playing chess and living what I had believed was an ordinary life. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "One more thing," Jordan said, standing. "Your wife purchased all 3 times with cash. No insurance. She didn't want a record." He paused at the door. "Except that we keep one anyway." Frank Dorsey had been my neighbor for 11 years. He was 63, broad-shouldered, and deliberate, the kind of man who expressed friendship through showing up rather than saying much. Every Thursday afternoon, weather permitting, we played chess on his back porch, a ritual that had survived 11 Maine winters and so far 1 attempted murder. He was not a man who dramatized things or offered opinions he hadn't been asked for, which was why when he came over on a Friday afternoon with the excuse of returning a handsaw he'd borrowed 2 weeks earlier, I knew something was wrong before he got through the door. "You got a minute?" he said. We sat at my kitchen table. He turned the handsaw over in his hands twice, set it down, and looked at me with the expression of a man about to say something he would rather not say. "My wife ran into Sharon Mills at the grocery store Tuesday," he said. "Sharon told her—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "She told her that you'd been having serious memory problems, that you'd gotten lost driving home from the hardware store last month, that Diane was worried and was trying to figure out what to do." He looked up. "She said it like it was just known, like everyone already knew." I looked at him steadily. "Frank, when did we last play chess?" "Last Thursday." "Who won?" A pause, then reluctantly a small smile. "You did. 3 games in under 40 minutes each." "Did I seem confused to you?" "No," he said flatly and without hesitation. "You seemed like you were enjoying yourself." He was quiet for a moment. "That's why I came over, because it didn't add up." I leaned forward slightly. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it carefully before you answer. I need you to think back over the last month, every time we've talked, every time you've seen me come and go, every game we've played. I need you to write it down. Dates, times, what you observed, as specific as you can be." Frank studied me for a long moment, the way a careful man studies something he doesn't fully understand, but is deciding whether to trust. "That this is serious," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "It is." He picked up the handsaw from the table and stood. "I'll have something for you by Sunday," he said. Then, at the door, "Harold, whatever's going on, you're not confused. I'd stake my own memory on it." He left without waiting for an answer. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him cross the yard, His footsteps deliberate on the frost-hardened grass, and I thought, she's not just writing me out of my own life. She's recruiting the neighborhood to hold the pen. Evelyn had asked me to go back further. After the bank confirmed the 4 transfers from June through September, she wanted me to pull every transaction record I could access going back 3 years. Look for patterns, she had said. Unusual deposits, irregular timing, anything that doesn't fit the ordinary rhythm of household spending. So, on the evening of the 25th, after Diane had gone to bed, I sat in my study with the door closed and a glass of water I never touched, and I started going through the records. I found the deposit at 11:17 p.m. March 14th, 2022. $50,000. Wire transfer into a personal account Diane maintained separately. One I knew existed, one I had never questioned, because we had always kept some finances independent of the joint accounts. The sender, G. Shaw. I sat back in my chair. I pulled up the photograph on my laptop, the one Vince had captured from the hidden compartment, the man in the dark jacket in the Portland Harbor Hotel lobby. I looked at his face for a long time, mid-40s. The kind of unremarkable confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Gavin Shaw. I opened our shared calendar archive, the one Diane and I had used for years to track appointments and family events. June 2022. There it was. Meeting with Martin Klein, re-estate planning. A week later, Dr. Pierce annual checkup, both. And then, in Diane's handwriting in the physical planner, I found in the desk drawer, discuss joint. Will medical POA. With Harold, approach carefully. March 2022. $50,000 from Gavin Shaw. June 2022. First conversation about joint wills and shared power of attorney. 3 months. The distance between a payment and a plan. I looked at the physical planner in my hand, Diane's handwriting looping in familiar, the same hand that had written grocery lists and birthday reminders and notes left on the kitchen counter for 4 decades. Approach carefully. Something broke open in my chest, just for a moment, just briefly in the privacy of that small room with the door closed and the rest of the house sleeping around me. Because the thing was, I remembered June 2022. I remembered it clearly. We had sat on the back porch on a Sunday evening, the air warm and smelling of cut grass, and Diane had said very gently that she had been thinking about getting their affairs properly in order, that it was just practical at their age, that she wanted to make sure they were taking care of each other. I had thought it was love. I had squeezed her hand and said that sounded like a good idea. I sat with that for a long time. The room was very quiet. The clock on the desk moved through 11:30 and toward midnight. Then I put the planner down. I put the photograph down. I picked up my pen and wrote the date and the amount and the name at the top of a fresh page of the legal pad, and I drew a line connecting it to June, and I kept working. Feel it later, I told myself. Right now, write it down. Dr. Samuel Pierce had been our family physician for 15 years. He was 60, soft-spoken, the kind of doctor who remembered your children's names and asked about them at every appointment. A good man, I had always thought, a careful one. Which was why when he arrived at our house on the afternoon of November 26th at Diane's invitation, a house call, something he rarely did, I watched him set his bag down in our living room and felt something close to grief. Because he was here to help her build the file. "Harold, it's good to see you," he said, settling into the armchair across from the sofa where I sat. His folder was open on his knee. Diane sat beside him, not quite next to him, close enough to prompt. "You too, Sam," I said. He asked his first question with the careful casualness of a man who had rehearsed it. "How have you been feeling lately? Any trouble with concentration, keeping track of things?" "No more than usual for someone who reads 3 books at once," I said. He smiled, made a note. "Any moments of confusion, difficulty remembering recent events? What specifically would qualify as a recent event?" He paused, just slightly. "Well, for example, do you remember what you had for dinner 2 nights ago?" "Grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, a glass of Pinot Gris. Diane made the salmon. I did the potatoes. We watched the news at 7 and went to bed around 10. I held his gaze. "Would you like last Tuesday as well?" Diane shifted in her seat. "Harold, he's just asking standard questions." "I understand that," I said pleasantly. "I'm curious which standard. Are you using the MMSE or the MOCA? Because the question sets are quite different, and the interpretation changes depending on which baseline you're working from. Dr. Pierce looked up from his folder. For the first time since he had arrived, he looked at me. Really looked not at his notes, not at Diane, but directly at me, and I saw something move behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who has just realized the ground under his feet is different from what he was told it would be. The MOCA is more comprehensive for, he began. For detecting mild cognitive impairment? Yes, I said. I've read the literature. If you'd like to administer it properly, I'm happy to do that. I'd actually prefer it. Diane's voice cut in smooth and warm. He's been like this lately, very focused on being right, very defensive. That's actually one of the things I've been concerned about. Dr. Pierce wrote something in his folder, but his pen moved slowly, and he did not look at Diane when she said it. The rest of the visit lasted 20 minutes. He asked a few more questions. I answered all of them accurately and completely, and once asked him to clarify his methodology, which he did, and which led to another long pause. When he stood to leave, he shook my hand. His grip was firm. He held it a half-second longer than a routine farewell required. At the door, he turned back and looked at me one more time. Not at Diane, at me. I couldn't read the expression on his face, but I didn't forget it. Diane's caregiver journal was 60 pages long and bound in pale blue. I found it on the evening of December, first in the middle drawer of her vanity, the same drawer where the guardianship folder had been. Diane was downstairs cooking, and I had gone up to retrieve a book from the nightstand. I had perhaps 20 minutes. I carried the journal to the bathroom, closed the door, turned on the tap the way I always did, and opened it on the counter under the light. The entries were dated and precise. November 3rd, H forgot to lock front door again, had to remind him twice. November 8th, H couldn't recall dinner from 2 nights ago when I mentioned it. November 15th, H seemed confused about his medications, asked me which ones he was supposed to take. I read each one carefully. Then I took out my phone and opened my own notes, the log I had been keeping since October, every entry time stamped automatically by the app. November 3rd, I had been at Frank Dorsey's house from 1:45 until 7:10 in the evening. I had locked the front door at 1:38. I had a photograph, a selfie Frank and I had taken on his porch at 2:03 p.m. with a visible timestamp, November 8th. I had made the dinner in question myself. I had the grocery receipt on my phone, time-stamped 4:47 p.m. November 6th. I remembered the meal precisely because I had tried a new spice combination on the chicken. November 15th. I had not been confused about my medications. I had in fact questioned Diane when she placed an unfamiliar pill beside my glass, and she had said Dr. Pierce had called it in. I had pocketed it instead of swallowing it and given it to Jordan Reyes the following morning. I photographed every page of the journal, 60 pages front and back in under 4 minutes. I put it back in the drawer, walked out of the bathroom, and went to the nightstand for my book. From downstairs, Diane's voice floated up, warm and unhurried. "Dinner in about 20 minutes, honey." "Sounds good," I called back. I sat on the edge of the bed with the book open on my lap, and I thought about 60 pages of careful dated lies, each one targeting a day she had not bothered to verify, each one a small, precise wound in the version of me she was building for a judge. She invented the days she didn't check, I thought. That's the mistake of someone who was never afraid of being caught. I went downstairs, set the table, poured 2 glasses of water, and I thought she should have been afraid. Evelyn had made quiet contact with Lena Marsh 2 days earlier, not directly and not officially. A carefully worded message through a shared professional contact, enough to let Lena know that questions about the Bennett household accounts were being asked in a legal context. Evelyn had told me not to expect anything. People in Lena's position, she said, usually went quiet and waited to see which way things fell. Lena didn't wait. My phone buzzed at 9:47. I was in the study with a book I had not been reading for the past hour, listening to the house settle around me, the creak of the radiator, the distant sound of wind off the harbor, Diane's footsteps overhead, moving from the bathroom to the bedroom and going quiet. The screen lit up with a number. I recognized Lena Marsh, the woman who had managed our household accounts for 7 years. Lena did not call after 9 p.m. That was a rule she had kept without exception. I picked up before the second ring. "Lena." Her voice was lower than usual, slightly compressed, the voice of someone calling from a room they weren't sure was private. "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry to call so late. A pause. "I needed to talk to you away from regular hours." Go ahead, I said quietly. I got up, crossed to the window, checked the yard from habit. Mrs. Bennett called me yesterday, she said. She wants me to finalize the property transfer documents before the 10th, this month. Another pause. I told her I needed your original signature on the transfer authorization. Not a scan, not a copy. The original. She said she would handle it. Lena's voice tightened. I asked again today. She told me, and I'm quoting here, that she hired me to complete paperwork, not to ask questions. I said nothing. I let the silence work. Mr. Bennett. Her voice dropped further. I've been doing this for 22 years. When a client tells me not to ask about signatures on a property transfer document, that's not something I can just move forward on. I could lose my license. But more than that, She stopped. Then, it doesn't feel right. None of this feels right. Something shifted in my chest. Not warmth exactly. More like the particular feeling of watching a load-bearing wall hold under pressure. Lena, I said carefully, I need you to do two things. First, do not finalize any document that doesn't have my original in-person signature. Not for any reason. Second, I need you to promise me you won't tell her you called. A long pause. Is everything okay? Not entirely, I said, but it will be. I heard her exhale a long, unsteady breath that carried more than she put into words. I have copies of everything she's sent me, she said quietly. Every instruction, every document draft. Keep them, I said. Keep every one. After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long moment. The harbor was invisible beyond the rooftops, but I could smell it in the cold air coming through the gap at the sill, salt and distance, and the particular darkness of deep water. She's running out of time, I thought, and when people run out of time, they make mistakes. I noticed the camera on a Thursday afternoon. It was a small thing, the kind of detail that would have slid past most people entirely. The security camera at the top of the staircase had been there for 3 years, installed after a neighbor's house was broken into 2 blocks over. It was positioned to cover the full hallway, and the top landing a wide-angle view that caught both the bedroom doors and the head of the stairs. Except, it wasn't covering the hallway anymore. I was in the study with the door open 2 inches enough to see the corridor without being seen when I watched Diane stand on the second-to-top step, with her phone comparing the live camera view on the app to the angle she was adjusting by hand. She moved the bracket by perhaps 15 degrees, checked the app again, made a small further adjustment. When she was done, the camera was pointing at exactly one thing, the top 7 steps of the staircase from the landing down to the 8th step, at the precise angle that would capture a person falling from the top. I took out my phone and opened the same security app. I took a screenshot of the current camera view. Then, I went into the history folder and found a screenshot I had taken 6 weeks earlier when I was checking the battery level, the wide-angle hallway view, time-stamped October 19th. 2 images. Same camera. Completely different angles. After Diane went downstairs, I walked to the top of the staircase and stood there for a moment. 14 steps to the bottom. Oak treads, no carpet runner. The railing was solid. I had checked it myself 2 summers ago. I looked down the length of the stairs, and I thought about the phrase whichever comes first, and I gripped the railing with both hands and walked down slowly 1 step at a time, the way I intended to keep walking down for a long time yet. In the kitchen, Diane was humming quietly to herself. Something without a tune, the sound of a person absorbed in an ordinary task. 14 steps, I thought, sitting down at the kitchen table and picking up the newspaper. I'm going to count them every single time from now on. That evening, I opened my phone and emailed both screenshots to Evelyn, the wide-angle hallway view from October 19th and the current frame locked on the top 7 stairs. No message. She would understand what she was looking at. She replied at 10:53 p.m. with 2 words received. Good. She put it beside my orange juice at 7:45 in the morning. A single capsule, pale yellow, no marking on the casing. Not the white oval of my metoprolol, which I had taken every morning for 4 years and knew by sight and by feel. This was something different. Dr. Pierce called in a new one. Diane set her back to me at the counter, her voice completely casual. For your heart, he said to start it this week. I looked at the capsule beside the glass. I looked at Diane's back. I looked at the capsule again. In the United States, when a doctor prescribes a new medication, the prescription goes directly to the pharmacy. The The pharmacy dispenses it in a labeled bottle with dosage instructions, the prescribing physician's name, and the patient's name printed on the label. A doctor does not call a patient's wife and ask her to hand-deliver a single unmarked capsule at breakfast. I picked it up, held it for a moment. "Did the pharmacy deliver it?" I asked. "I picked it up yesterday." She turned from the counter with her own coffee, smiling the way you smile at someone who asks unnecessary questions. "Pierce said to take it with food." I put the capsule in my mouth, took a long swallow of orange juice, felt Diane watching me from across the kitchen with the particular quality of attention that isn't quite watching and isn't quite not watching. Then she turned to rinse her mug, and I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, and I removed the capsule into a paper napkin in my palm. I folded the napkin, put it in my shirt pocket. "Good," she said, still at the sink. "Pierce said it would take a few weeks to notice the difference." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, and opened the newspaper. The next morning I drove to Eastside Pharmacy before Diane was up. Jordan Reyes had the result, before noon, digoxin 0.25 milligrams. Double the standard therapeutic dose for a patient with an indicated condition. In a patient already taking metoprolol, a beta blocker that also slows the heart, the combined effect at that dosage could cause the heart to slow to a dangerously low rate or stop its rhythm altogether, quietly, without warning, in a way that would look to any responding physician entirely consistent with natural causes in a 68-year-old man. Jordan set the result down on the desk between us and looked at me steadily. "Call Evelyn," I said before he could speak. "Already did," he said, 40 minutes ago." I looked at the result one more time. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my inside jacket pocket next to the legal pad and the USB drive and 43 years of a life I was apparently not supposed to finish. Layer 3. I thought, walking back to the car. Done. Evelyn called at 7:58 in the morning. "Come in," she said. No greeting, no preamble. "Now, if you can." I was at her office by 8:45. She was standing at the window when I came in, which was unusual. Evelyn Hart was a woman who sat at tables and worked from them, not a person who stood at windows. She turned when I entered and pointed to the chair across from her desk without sitting down herself. "Dr. Pierce called me last night," she said. I went very still. "He found my number through the Bar Association directory." She finally sat, picked up her pen, set it down again, the closest thing to restlessness I had ever seen from her. "He said he was asked to create a medical record establishing a pattern of cognitive decline in a patient he has known for 15 years. He said he met with that patient recently and found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever." She looked at me directly. "He said he was not comfortable with what he had been asked to do, and he wanted the patient to know." The room was quiet for a long moment. "He didn't know you were already my client," Evelyn continued. "He just wanted to reach whoever was protecting you." She paused. "He's already contacted Dr. Nora Whitman at Maine Medical Center. She's a neurologist, independent, no prior relationship with your family. He asked her to conduct a proper evaluation." Another pause. "He also said he intends to file a voluntary report with the Maine Board of Licensure in Medicine, acknowledging that he allowed himself to be guided by a family member in creating documentation that he now believes was not medically justified." I sat with that for a moment. In 26 years of working with precision machinery, I had watched components fail and components hold. The ones that held under pressure were always the ones you hadn't designed into the load-bearing structure, the unexpected redundancies, the parts that weren't supposed to matter, but did. "He's doing the right thing," I said finally. "He is," Evelyn said. "Late, but he is." She opened the folder on her desk. "He's also providing a written statement that Diane Bennett initiated contact with him in September, and specifically requested documentation of memory concerns. That's conspiracy to commit fraud on the court." She looked up. "Harold, this changes the shape of everything." I thought about the look on Dr. Pierce's face at my front door 3 weeks ago, the held handshake, the glance back that I couldn't read. He had been trying to tell me something. He just hadn't found the words yet. "When can I see Dr. Whitman?" I asked. "Wednesday," Evelyn said. 10 o'clock, bring Claire." Dr. Nora Whitman's office was on the 3rd floor of Maine Medical Center, with windows that faced east and let in the flat winter light without apology. She was 52, with reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades listening carefully. She shook my hand, then Claire's, and showed us both to chairs before sitting across from us with a clean legal pad and no folder from anyone else's office. "I want to be clear about something before we begin," she said. "I have not reviewed any prior documentation about Mr. Bennett. I asked Dr. Pierce specifically not to send me anything. I want a clean baseline." She looked at me steadily. "Is that acceptable to you?" "More than acceptable," I said. The assessment took 90 minutes. She administered the MOCA first 30 points covering short-term memory, visuospatial ability, executive function, attention language, and orientation, then a modified version of the MMSE, then 40 minutes of clinical interview, during which she asked about my engineering career, my daily routines, my reading habits, and my opinion on a recent article about infrastructure decay in New England cities, which I had in fact read, and which led to a 15-minute conversation that she periodically interrupted with a quiet note on her legal pad. Claire sat in the corner chair without speaking. She watched her father answer every question with the focused, unhurried precision of a man who had spent 35 years reading technical schematics and trusted his own mind completely. Halfway through the clinical interview, I noticed her quietly fold her hands in her lap, the way a person does when something they were bracing for doesn't happen. When Dr. Whitman finished, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "your cognitive function is fully intact. Short-term and long-term memory are within normal range for a healthy 68-year-old. Executive function is notably strong. There is no evidence of any cognitive decline that would warrant further evaluation, let alone legal intervention." She picked up her pen again and signed the bottom of the 4th page of her report. "I'll have the full written assessment to your attorney by end of day." The room was very quiet. "Thank you," I said. She handed me a copy across the desk. 4 pages signed, dated the Maine Medical Center letterhead across the top. "Mr. Bennett," she said, as Claire and I stood to leave. Her voice had shifted slightly, still professional, but with something else underneath. Something that sounded like carefully restrained anger on my behalf. "No one should have to come here to prove they're themselves." I held the door open for Claire. "No," I agreed. "They shouldn't." Claire didn't speak until we were in the car. I pulled out of the Maine Medical Center parking lot and drove south without saying where I was going. She sat in the passenger seat with the copy of Dr. Whitman's report on her lap, her hands flat on top of it, and she looked out the window at the December street scrolling past. I took the route that followed the shoreline past the old ferry terminal out toward the Cape. I parked at Portland Head Light and turned off the engine. The lighthouse stood white against a pewter sky, the Atlantic gray and enormous beyond the rocks. A cold wind rocked the car slightly. Neither of us moved for a moment. "Tell me," Claire said. Her voice was quiet and even, not a question. A door she was holding open. So, I told her, not everything I gave her: the architecture, not every brick, the bag, the hidden compartment, the transition plan and its 12 numbered steps, the forged signatures and the $340,000, the caregiver journal with its invented entries, the yellow pill she had placed beside my orange juice, the camera on the staircase repositioned to capture 14 steps at the perfect angle. I talked for 25 minutes. Claire didn't interrupt once. When I stopped, she was quiet for a long time, looking out at the water. The lighthouse beam swept past in its slow rotation, indifferent to everything below it. "How long have you known?" she finally asked. "Since October 8th. 2 months?" It was an accusation, just the weight of it measured out loud. I needed enough that she couldn't walk away from it, I said. 1 piece wasn't enough. 2 pieces wasn't enough. I needed all 3 layers simultaneously, or she'd find a way to explain it. Claire turned and looked at me. Her eyes were dry, but something in her face had changed, a settling like a structure that has just found its true load-bearing position. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "1 thing," I said. "Come to the family meeting Saturday, and don't sign anything. Whatever she puts in front of you, whatever anyone in that room says, don't sign a single page." Claire held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, once the way she had nodded as a child when she had fully understood something and didn't need it repeated. "Okay," she said. I started the car. The lighthouse kept its slow, steady rotation behind us as I pulled back onto the road, and I thought about Saturday and about 3 folders sitting in Evelyn Hart's office, and about a woman who had spent 3 years building a plan she believed was invisible. She almost was right, I thought. Almost. I had not called Thomas. I had made that decision deliberately, and I had sat with it long enough to be certain of it. If he came down from Boston carrying his anger, and he would, because he was his father's son, he would walk into that room on Saturday and say something that gave Diane exactly the opening she needed, a confrontation she could reframe. A son defending his father in a way that looked to Sharon Mills and Rick Hollis like the behavior of a troubled family closing ranks. I needed the room to be quiet until the folders hit the table. Thomas would understand that, eventually. This was 10 days earlier, Wednesday the 3rd of December, before the yellow pill, before Dr. Whitman, before Claire stood at the edge of the Atlantic and said, okay, with the full weight of what that word meant. Evelyn had called it our third meeting. I thought of it as the moment the plan stopped being a defense and became something else entirely. Her conference room had 3 folders on the table when I arrived, one red one, green, one yellow, arranged in a row with the precision of someone who had been thinking about this for a long time. Sit down, she said. I want to show you something. She opened the red folder first. Physical evidence, the photographs from the hidden compartment, the transition plan, the Plan B note, Vince Leary's ledger entry from April 14th establishing premeditation, the camera photographs before and after. She closed it and moved to the green. Financial. Maya Collins' report on the forged signature, the 4 structured transfers totaling $340,000. Lena Marsh's copies of every document Diane sent her, including the transfer authorization she refused to process without your original signature. She closed the green folder and opened the yellow. Medical. Jordan's pharmaceutical records and the camera footage from all 3 digoxin purchases. The test result from the capsule you didn't swallow, Dr. Pierce's voluntary statement, and she tapped the yellow folder. We're waiting on Dr. Whitman's independent evaluation. I looked at the 3 folders. And the sequence matters, Evelyn said, sitting down across from me. Red goes down first. It raises the question, is there an intent to harm? Green goes second. It proves the harm has already been occurring. Money is gone. Signatures have been forged. Yellow goes last. She paused. Because yellow removes every remaining defense she has. She cannot say you're confused. She cannot say you misunderstood. She cannot say the financial activity was authorized. She looked at me steadily. But the folders don't matter if she doesn't incriminate herself. We need her to say something that only the architect of this plan would know. She will, I said. When she's cornered, she explains. She's always explained. It's what she does when she believes she's the smartest person in the room. Evelyn held my gaze for a long moment. Are you certain? I thought about 43 years of Wednesday mornings and back porch conversations and a woman who had never once in my memory allowed a misunderstanding to stand uncorrected. I know her, I said. That's the one thing in all of this I'm certain of. Evelyn picked up her pen. Then we wait for her to call the meeting. She will, it's step 11 on her checklist. She wrote something on her legal pad. When she does, you text me one word. I'll be in my car on your street by 1:30. She looked up. And Harold, no matter what happens in that room, do not confront her before the folders are on the table. Not one word, not one look she can read. I nodded. Outside, the December wind drove a scattering of dry snow against the office window. She'll call the meeting, I thought, pulling on my jacket. And when she does, I'll be ready. She made the calls on a Wednesday evening. I was in the study with the door pulled to not quite close the way I had learned to leave it when I needed to hear the house. Diane's footsteps moved upstairs, the familiar creak of the bedroom floorboard, and then her voice lower than usual, the careful quiet of a person who believes the walls are thicker than they are. I moved to the hallway and stood still. The first call, Rick Hollis, her cousin, a loud and physical presence I had always found exhausting. I heard his name, heard Diane say, Saturday 2 o'clock, the house heard the particular warmth she reserved for people she was managing. It's important, she said. Family matters. I need you there. The second call, Sharon Mills, her oldest friend, the woman who had been spreading quiet stories about my memory through the neighborhood for 3 weeks. Sharon, I need a favor. Just come Saturday. You'll understand when you're here. A pause. Then a third call, shorter, more businesslike. Martin Klein, the lawyer. Martin, Saturday afternoon? Yes, I think we'll be ready. Another pause. Come at 3:30. I want the initial conversation done before you arrive. I walked back to the study, sat down, picked up my phone, and typed a text to Evelyn Saturday the 13th. My house, 2 o'clock. Her reply came back in under a minute. "I'll be on Westbrook Drive by 1:30. Text me when you need me inside. Everything is ready." I set the phone down on the desk and sat with the silence of the house for a long moment. Diane's voice had gone quiet upstairs. I could hear the faint sound of the television she sometimes watched before bed, the low murmur of a late news program filtering through the ceiling. Saturday, 3 days, 3. I thought about the 3 folders sitting in Evelyn's office, red, green, yellow. I thought about Claire, who would come through that front door on Saturday afternoon and sit across from me and not sign a single page. I thought about Frank Dorsey, who had promised he would have something written down by Sunday and had delivered it on Saturday morning, 12 pages of neat time-stamped handwriting, covering every day in November and the first 2 weeks of December. I opened the desk drawer and took out the legal pad, looked at the 3 words at the top of the first page, the ones I had written in the dark weeks ago after coming home from Vince's side door in the gray October morning. Layer 1, Layer 2, Layer 3. Every line beneath them filled in now, every box checked. She's calling her witnesses. I thought putting the pad away, and I've already called mine. Saturday arrived the way December mornings do in Portland, gray and cold, and without apology. I was downstairs by 6:45. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove, and I stood at the counter for a moment in the quiet, listening to the particular stillness of a house that doesn't yet know what the day holds. Then I filled the kettle and set it on the burner and texted Evelyn at 7, even today. Her reply was immediate, as if she hadn't slept either. "Ready? I'll be on Westbrook Drive by 1:30. Text when you need me inside." I was reading the paper at the kitchen table when Diane came downstairs at 8:15. She was already dressed not in her usual weekend clothes, but in the gray wool dress she wore to things that mattered. Her hair was done. She was carrying the navy blue folder under her arm. "You're up early," I said. "Lots to do before this afternoon." She set the folder on the counter and moved to the coffee, her back to me, her movements brisk and purposeful. The folder had Martin Klein's business card clipped to the front. I could see the corner of it from where I sat. "What's happening this afternoon?" I asked. She turned and smiled at me. Warm practice, the smile of a woman who had been rehearsing this day for a long time. "Just some family things I've been wanting to sort out. Claire's coming, and Rick and a few others." A pause. "Nothing to worry about." "I'm not worried," I said. She held my gaze for just a moment too long. Then she turned back to her coffee, and I turned back to my newspaper, and we sat together in the gray December morning light, the way we had sat together 1,000 times before, except that this time I was counting the hours. At 9 o'clock, I went upstairs and showered and dressed slowly, taking my time with each step. I put on the jacket with the inside pocket, the one that had carried the USB drive, and the legal pad and the folded pharmacy report for the past 2 months. I checked the pocket out of habit, though. There was nothing in it today. Everything that needed to be carried was already at Evelyn's office, sorted into 3 folders by color. I came back downstairs. Diane was rearranging the living room chairs, her back to me, absorbed in the geometry of the space. She's setting a stage, I thought, watching her from the doorway. So am I. They came at 2 o'clock, give or take. Rick Hollis was first. He was 62, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of physical confidence that fills a doorframe before the rest of the person follows. He shook my hand the way men shake hands when they want you to know they could choose not to, firm slightly too long, his eyes already moving around the room, cataloging and claiming. "Harold," he said. "Good to see you." "Rick," I stepped back to let him in. "Coffee's on." He didn't take the coffee. He took the armchair closest to the center of the room, the one Diane had positioned there this morning, and sat in it with the settled ease of a man who believes every room belongs to him once he's in it. Sharon Mills arrived 10 minutes later, flushed from the cold, a casserole dish she had no reason to bring, pressed against her coat. She was 64, with a kind face that had learned over decades of absorbing Diane's version of the world to express concern as a default setting. She hugged Diane at the door. Then she turned to me, and the hug she gave me had that particular quality of pity arms, held slightly too long a pat on the back, that lasted 1 beat past comfort. "Harold," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You look well." The way she said it made clear she had expected otherwise. "I am well," I said. She smiled the way you smile at someone who doesn't quite understand their own situation, and moved to take a seat beside Rick. Claire arrived last 3 minutes after Sharon. She came through the door in her gray coat, unwinding her scarf, and her eyes found mine immediately the way they had found mine at Portland Head Light across the car with the Atlantic behind her. She gave me a small nod, barely perceptible, and chose a chair directly across from me, the one with the clearest sightline to my face. Diane stood at the center of the room. She had been standing there, I noticed, since Rick arrived, positioning herself at the point where every eye in the room would naturally converge. "Thank you all for coming." She began, her voice warm and unhurried. "I've asked you here because I love Harold, and because I'm worried about him, and because I think it's time for our family to have an honest conversation." Rick nodded. Sharon clasped her hands. I looked at the navy blue folder on the coffee table. 2 folders away from everything changing, I thought. 2 folders and 1 wrong word. Diane read from the caregiver journal for 11 minutes. She had selected the entries carefully, the ones with the most specific detail, the ones that sounded the most credible, the ones she had written on days she believed I had no alibi for. Her voice was steady and low-pitched for concern, rather than accusation, and she paused after each entry to let it settle. Rick shook his head slowly after the 3rd one. Sharon pressed a hand to her mouth. I sat with my hands on my knees, and I did not react. Not once. I had made that promise to myself and to Evelyn, and I kept it. When Diane finished, she reached into the navy blue folder and produced a single sheet of paper. She set it on the coffee table in front of Claire. "This is a statement of family concern," she said. "It simply confirms that the people closest to Harold share his family's worry about his well-being. It supports our request for a proper medical evaluation by a court-approved specialist." She looked at Claire directly. "It's not legal action, it's just family looking after family." Rick reached into his jacket pocket and produced a pen, setting it on the table beside the document with a small, deliberate click. "It's nothing to worry about, Claire. We just need everyone on the same page." Claire picked up the paper. Read it again." I did not look at her. I looked at the wall above the fireplace, a photograph of the 4 of us taken at Thomas's college graduation, 2007, all of us squinting into summer light. I kept my face completely neutral, and I waited. "I'd like to read this more carefully before I sign anything," Claire said. Rick's voice dropped into the register menus when they want to sound reasonable while removing options. "There's nothing complicated in it, Claire. It's a simple statement of—" "I heard you," Claire said. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It simply became very clear and very still, the way water becomes still before it freezes. I said, "I need to read it carefully first. That's what I'm going to do." She set the paper back on the table, set Rick's pen beside it. The room shifted. Not dramatically, no one stood up, no voices were raised, but something moved through it the way pressure moves through a sealed space. Diane looked at me, then a quick assessing glance, the engineer's look I had cataloged months ago, and I looked back at her with a face that gave her absolutely nothing. Sharon broke the silence. "Diane, maybe we should give her a—" "It's fine," Diane said smoothly. "We have time." But something in her voice had changed, just slightly, just enough. She's recalculating, I thought. Good. Diane brought the pill at 3 o'clock exactly. She came from the kitchen carrying a glass of water, and the familiar pale yellow capsule on a small ceramic dish, the same dish she used for vitamins, the same gesture she had been rehearsing for days. She set it on the side table beside my chair, with the practiced naturalness of a woman performing a routine she had performed many times. Except, she had never done this in front of other people before. "Time for your afternoon medication, honey," she said, and her voice carried just enough gentle public care to make Rick nod and Sharon's expression soften into something that looked like confirmation. Frank Dorsey, who had arrived at the front door 6 minutes earlier with the excuse of returning a book he had borrowed 3 weeks ago, stood quietly at the edge of the room. He looked at the ceramic dish. He looked at me. He said nothing. I looked at the capsule. I looked at Diane. I looked around the room, Rick in the center chair, Sharon on the sofa, Claire across from me, Frank at the door, Diane standing over me with a glass of water. 6 people, the room sealed and still and waiting. And I thought now. "Diane," I said. My voice was calm and unhurried and carried to every corner of the room. "Before I take that, I have a question." She smiled. "Of course, honey." "Were you planning on the stairs first?" I said, "or the medication?" The room went absolutely silent. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of a held breath, every person in the room suddenly simultaneously not breathing. Diane's smile did not fall. It suspended, like a clock that has stopped mid-tick, frozen at the precise moment before it would have had to become something else. "Harold!" She began, her voice still smooth, still reaching for the register of patient concern. "Because the plan I found in your bag," I said, listed both options, stairs or meds, whichever comes first. "I want to make sure I understand which timeline we're on." The color left her face, not dramatically, not a sudden draining of blood, not a theatrical collapse, just a slow, quiet evacuation, the way light leaves a room when the sun moves. "That's—" She stopped. "Go ahead," I said gently. "You can't prove—" She stopped again, her jaw tightened. "You can't prove what the dosage was." She heard herself. I watched the exact moment she heard herself. "Thank you," I said quietly. That's the word I needed. I took out my phone and sent one text, "Now." 45 seconds later, the front door opened and Evelyn Hart walked in from the December cold, 3 folders tucked under her arm, one red, one green, one yellow. Before I reveal what happened in that room, and trust me, nothing went the way anyone expected, leave a comment with just one word. What do you think Diane said when the folders hit the table? One word I'll be reading. "Thank you for staying this far." And a gentle reminder, some scenes ahead are shaped by fiction to carry a deeper point across. If you'd rather not continue, you can stop here, but if you do stay, I think you'll find it was worth it. Evelyn set the folders on the coffee table without a word of introduction. Red first, then green, then yellow, a clean row in the center of the table covering the statement of family concern Diane had placed there 20 minutes earlier. She didn't move that document out of the way. She covered it. Then she straightened up, looked at every person in the room exactly once, and said, "My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm Harold Bennett's attorney. I'd ask everyone to please sit down." Rick Hollis did not sit down. "Who let you in?" "Harold did," Evelyn said, without looking at him. 3 months ago, when he retained me." She opened the red folder. "Physical evidence," she said. 4 photographs recovered from a concealed compartment in a burgundy leather handbag, a compartment custom ordered at Leary Leather on Exchange Street on April 14th of this year, 6 months before Harold was aware of its existence. The order was placed in cash, no name given. She laid the photographs out on the table, face up. The transition plan, 12 steps, typed with a completion target of December 15th. She laid that beside the photographs. And a handwritten note, Plan B stairs, or meds, whichever comes first. She paused. I believe we heard one of those options referenced approximately 4 minutes ago. The room was absolutely still. Then she opened the green folder. Financial evidence, a report from First Harbor Bank's fraud prevention specialist, confirming that the signature on a financial power of attorney, filed in August of this year, deviates consistently from Harold's authenticated signature by approximately 3 degrees characteristic of a practiced copy. 4 transfers totaling $340,000, structured in amounts under $90,000 to avoid automatic federal reporting thresholds. She set Maya's report on the table. And copies of every document instruction sent to the household accountant, including a demand to finalize property transfers without Harold's original signature, which the accountant refused. Diane said nothing. She was looking at the green folder with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not calculation, but something that looked almost like the specific focus of a person, trying very hard to find the exit in a room that has no exits. Evelyn opened the yellow folder. Medical evidence, pharmacy records showing 3 cash purchases of digoxin, a cardiac medication. Harold is not prescribed on August 28th, September 19th, and October 14th. A laboratory analysis of a capsule. Harold did not swallow on December 5th, confirming digoxin at 0.25 milligrams, double standard therapeutic dose, with a documented dangerous interaction with Harold's prescribed metoprolol. She set Dr. Whitman's report on top, and an independent neurological evaluation, signed and dated December 10th, confirming Harold Bennett's cognitive function is fully intact. She closed all 3 folders. All 3 reports are from independent sources with no prior relationship to Harold. All original documents are in the custody of my office. Copies have been filed with Portland Police Department. She looked at Diane directly for the first time. "Mrs. Bennett, I'd strongly recommend you say nothing further without your own attorney present." For about 5 seconds, no one moved. Then Rick Hollis stood up. "This is fabricated," he said loudly and with the particular confidence of a man who has never needed to be right, only present. "All of this. You can't walk into someone's home and—" Evelyn reached into her bag and placed a single document on the table, notarized original seal visible from across the room. Vince Leary's signed statement notarized November 5th, attesting to the April 14th order. I have originals for every document in these folders. She looked at Rick with an expression of complete professional neutrality. You're welcome to examine any of them. Rick sat back down. Sharon Mills had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her eyes were bright and wet, moving from the folders to Diane to Harold and back like a woman watching a building come down that she had believed was solid. A small sound escaped her, not quite a word. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Diane, I didn't— You told me he was—" "Sharon." Diane's voice was sharp, reflexive, the voice of a person cutting a thread before it unravels further. Then she seemed to hear herself, and she stopped. Claire stood up from her chair and crossed the room to stand beside me. She didn't take my hand. She didn't say anything. She just stood there shoulder to shoulder with me, and that was enough. More than enough. Frank Dorsey reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone, opened an app. I have written records with timestamps covering every day in the Caregiver Journal from November 3rd through December 12th. He said to no one in particular to the room at large. Every day she says Harold was confused or forgetful. I can account for where he was and what he was doing. I have photographs. He held up the phone briefly. I'm prepared to provide all of it. The front door opened at that moment. Martin Klein stepped into the hallway, saw the 3 open folders on the coffee table, saw Evelyn Hart standing in the center of the room, and went very still. He set his briefcase down beside the door. "Ms. Hart," he said quietly, "I think I need to speak with you privately, at your earliest convenience." "My office, Monday morning," Evelyn said without turning around. 8 o'clock. Diane was sitting on the sofa now. At some point in the last few minutes, she had moved from the center of the room, the commanding position she had held for the entire afternoon, to the corner of the sofa. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the 3 folders on the table, and she said nothing at all. I looked at her. For a long moment, I just looked at the woman I had been married to for 43 years. "Evelyn," I said, "make the call." 2 officers arrived at 4:15. Evelyn had called Portland PD before she walked through my front door. The formal request had gone in the morning with the full hoe so attached, and the response had been coordinated in advance. This was not a 911 call. This was a prearranged law enforcement response to a documented case, which meant when the patrol car pulled up to the house on Westbrook Drive, both officers already knew the outline of what they were walking into. They were professional and quiet. One spoke briefly with Evelyn at the door. The other remained in the hallway. Diane stood when they came in. She smoothed her gray dress, the one she had put on that morning, for a day she had been planning for 3 years. She looked at the officer in front of her, and she said very clearly, "I understand." She didn't look at Rick. She didn't look at Sharon. She didn't look at Claire. She looked at me. It was a long look, 4 or 5 seconds, maybe more. And I had known this woman for 43 years, had read her face across breakfast tables and hospital waiting rooms, and the front seats of cars on long drives, and I could not read what was in that look. Not anger, not grief. Not the calculation I had grown accustomed to watching move behind her eyes. Something else. Something I had no name for, and would spend a long time not being able to name. Then she turned and walked out of the living room and through the front door, and the December cold came in briefly before the door swung shut behind her. The patrol car's lights moved slowly out of the driveway and down Westbrook Drive, and then the street was quiet, and the living room was quiet, and Rick Hollis was putting on his coat, and Sharon was crying softly into a tissue, and Frank was standing at the window with his hands in his pockets looking out at the empty street. Claire was still standing beside me. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was complicated, and I was tired of complicated answers. "I'm still here," I said. She nodded the way she had nodded at Portland Head Light, like that was enough, like that was, in fact, everything. "Come on," she said. "Let me make you some coffee." We walked together into the kitchen, and I heard Frank follow us in, and outside the December dark was coming down fast and early, the way it always does in Maine, and the house was quieter than it had ever been. 3 days after the officers left Westbrook Drive, I sat in Evelyn Hart's conference room for the 4th time. The table was clean, no folders this time, They were in police custody now, logged and sealed, doing the work they had been built to do. Evelyn sat across from me with a fresh legal pad, and Claire sat beside me with her coat still, on the way she did when she wasn't planning to stay longer than necessary. "Here's where we are," Evelyn said, and she went through it the way she went through everything methodically, without softening it. "The DA's office has received the full file. Based on what's been submitted, we're looking at several counts. Forgery on the power of attorney, that's a Class C felony in Maine, up to 5 years. The structured financial transfers, $340,000 through fraudulent authorization, that's theft by deception, above $10,000, a Class B felony, up to 10 years. She paused. "The digoxin, purchasing a prescription cardiac medication without a prescription, administering it to a person, without their knowledge in a dosage that creates a life-threatening drug interaction, the DA is reviewing that as attempted murder, Class A felony, up to 30 years. Claire was very still beside me. "Martin Klein contacted my office Saturday evening," Evelyn continued. "He's entered into a cooperation agreement with the investigation. The guardianship petition documents become evidence against Diane rather than for her." A beat. Dr. Pierce filed his voluntary report with the Maine Board of Licensure on Sunday. He's acknowledged that he allowed himself to be directed by a family member to create documentation without independent clinical basis. His license is under review, but his cooperation strengthens the conspiracy charge significantly. "And Lena?" I asked. "She met with the investigator yesterday morning. Full cooperation, every email, every document, instruction, every phone call she kept records of. She's been told she's not a target of the investigation." Evelyn looked up from the pad. "She did the right thing eventually." "Eventually?" I said. "It counts," Evelyn said simply. She closed the legal pad. For a moment, the room was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows the end of something large. "Harold!" Her voice shifted, still professional, but with the particular directness she reserved for things that mattered outside of strategy. "You should know I've handled fraud cases for 22 years. I've never seen a private individual build a 3-layer evidentiary case of this quality without law enforcement assistance." She paused. "You did something very difficult very carefully under conditions that would have broken most people." I didn't know what to say to that. I looked at the empty table where the 3 folders had been. "He had help," Claire said quietly beside me. "He did," Evelyn agreed. She looked at me. "Are you all right?" I thought about that. The same question Claire had asked me in the kitchen 3 days ago, with the December dark coming in through the windows. "I will be," I said. "That's close enough for now." Thomas arrived at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. He had driven up from Boston that morning, which meant he had been in the car with his thoughts for 2 hours, before he walked through my front door, and I could see the weight of that, in the way he moved, careful, contained like a man carrying something he hadn't figured out yet how to set down. He was 39, broader than I remembered from the last time I'd seen him in September, with the particular tiredness around the eyes that comes from not sleeping well for several days. He hugged me at the door, a real hug longer than our usual, and then stepped back and looked at me, the way you look at someone you've been worried about and are relieved to find standing. Claire had made beef stew, the recipe that had been our mother's and was now hers. The 3 of us sat around the kitchen table, the way we had sat around kitchen tables for 30 years. And for the first few minutes, we talked about the drive, the weather, the parking situation on Westbrook Drive in December. Then Thomas set down his spoon. "How long did you know?" he asked. "Since October 8th. I said. He was quiet for a moment. 2 months. You knew for 2 months and you didn't." He stopped, picked up his spoon, put it down again. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because I needed enough," I said. "One piece wasn't enough. If I'd called you in October with a photograph and a checklist, what would you have done?" A long pause. "I don't know." "You would have called her, or come down here and confronted her. And she would have explained it away, and we'd have lost everything." I held his gaze. I needed all 3 layers at once. I needed it to be something she couldn't walk out of. Thomas looked at his bowl. At the table. At some point in the middle distance that wasn't in the room. "Did she ever—" He stopped again. His jaw tightened. "Was any of it real? The marriage, was any of it actually real?" It was the question I had been sitting with since October, since the night I found $50,000 from Gavin Shaw, dated March 2022, and a calendar notation that read, "Approach carefully." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've stopped needing to know." Thomas looked up at me sharply, not angry, but surprised. "The people in this room are real," I said. "That's what I know. That's what I have." Something shifted in his face then. Not resolution exactly. More like the beginning of it, the first movement of a thing that would take longer to complete, but had finally started. Claire refilled his bowl without asking. He let her. Outside the kitchen window, the December dark had come down early, and the light above the stove made the room warm and small and exactly the right size. Frank was already on his back porch when I came through the gate on Wednesday afternoon. The chessboard was set up on the wooden table between the two chairs, the pieces arranged for a new game, a thermos of coffee sitting beside it with 2 mugs. He looked up when I came through the gate, nodded once, and poured the coffee without being asked. We sat down. He moved his king's pawn 2 squares forward. I mirrored him. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. That was the thing about chess with Frank. It had its own language, and sometimes that language was enough. After the third move, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a spiral-bound notebook, about 60 pages covered in his neat, unhurried handwriting. He set it on the table beside the board. "Evelyn called me Monday," he said. "She said the investigators would need the original. I made you a copy." He tapped the notebook. "Every day from November 1st to December 13th. Date, time, what I saw or heard, who else was present if anyone. Photographs are on my phone. With timestamps, she has those already." I picked up the notebook, opened it to the first page. November 1st, 2025, 1:47 p.m. Harold Bennett arrived at my residence for our weekly chess session. Appeared alert, oriented, engaged. Won 2 of 3 games in approximately 35 minutes each. I closed it. "Frank," I said, "you spent 6 weeks writing this." He moved his knight. "I had the time." "You didn't have to." He looked up at me over the board with the expression of a man who has considered an argument and found it unpersuasive. "You're my neighbor," he said. "You've been my neighbor for 11 years. I've watched you fix that fence 3 times because you insist on doing it right instead of fast." He picked up his coffee mug. "A man who fixes a fence that carefully deserves someone who writes things down carefully." He took a sip. "Your move?" I looked at the board for a moment. Then I moved my bishop. We played for an hour and a half. He won the first game, I won the second and third. The December afternoon went gray and then dark around us, and at some point, Frank brought out a blanket from inside and draped it over the back of his chair without offering one to me, which was exactly the kind of thing Frank did. When I stood to leave, I tucked the notebook inside my jacket. "Thank you," I said. He was already resetting the board for next week. "Same time Thursday," he said without looking up. I walked back through the gate and across the frost-hardened yard and into my house, and I stood in the kitchen for a moment, holding Frank's notebook against my chest, and I thought about a man who had spent 6 weeks writing down the truth in neat handwriting, because his neighbor deserved to have the truth written down. Some things I thought you can't put a value on. Maya Collins called at 9:15 on a Monday morning. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, a habit I had kept through everything, because some habits are load-bearing in ways you don't fully appreciate until you test them. Her voice was the same as it always was, measured professional, carrying information efficiently without decoration. "Mr. Bennett, I wanted to update you personally before the formal notification goes out." A brief pause. "The account belonging to Gavin Shaw has been frozen by court order as of Friday. All $340,000 are confirmed present and accounted for. The DA's office has filed for a recovery order. The timeline for return to your account is approximately 6 to 8 weeks, pending final court approval." I set the newspaper down. "That's good news." "There's more," she said. "The investigation into Mr. Shaw's account turned up something the DA's office thought you should know." Another pause, the kind that precedes information that changes the shape of things. Investigators found a folder of documents in Diane Bennett's home office apparently prepared, but never filed. The documents appear to be a fraud complaint naming Gavin Shaw as having embezzled funds from the Bennett household. She let that land for a moment. Mr. Shaw, it appears, had no knowledge of the plan regarding the medication or the staircase. According to the investigators, Diane had told Shaw that Harold was experiencing serious cognitive decline and that the transfers were a legally structured form of asset protection, moving funds out of Harold's reach before he made decisions that could damage the family's finances. Shaw had believed he was helping facilitate a legitimate arrangement between a worried wife and a vulnerable husband. He had not asked enough questions. That the DA's office noted was its own kind of problem, but it was a different problem from the one Diane was facing. He believed he was participating in a legitimate asset transfer. The documents suggest that once the transfer was complete and Harold Bennett was no longer in the picture, Diane Bennett intended to report Gavin Shaw to authorities, effectively using the investigation of him to explain away the missing funds and distance herself from the entire arrangement. I sat with that for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the December sky was the particular flat white of a day that can't decide between snow and cloud. She was going to have him arrested, I said. That's what the evidence suggests, Maya said carefully. He was the last piece she intended to remove. I called Evelyn immediately after. She listened to the summary without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for 3 full seconds. She built a machine, Evelyn said finally, designed to eliminate every person who knew too much, including the person she built it with. A pause. Harold. In 22 years, I have never seen a case where the architect of a conspiracy was also the final target of it. Is Gavin Shaw being charged? That depends on what he knew and when he knew it. Right now he's cooperating fully. She paused. He's also apparently quite shaken. I imagined he was. I looked out at the flat white sky, and I thought about a man in a dark jacket in the Portland Harbor Hotel lobby, confident and unremarkable, who had believed himself to be a partner in something, and had been all along an instrument in a plan he didn't know the full shape of. Nobody in that machine was safe, I thought. Not even the people running it. Claire put the tree up on the morning of the 24th. It was a small one, 3 feet tall, from the lot on Forest Avenue, slightly lopsided on the left side, in a way she claimed was character, and I suspected was just the tree she could carry by herself. She set it on the side table in the living room and strung it with the old lights from the box in the basement, the ones with the slightly yellowed wire that I had been meaning to replace for 6 years. Thomas arrived at noon with a bottle of Merlot and the expression of a man who had made a decision somewhere on the drive up from Boston and was carrying it lightly now, the way you carry something once you've finally figured out where to put it down. Frank came at 5:30, stomping snow off his boots at the front door, a container of cookies his neighbor had apparently made, and he had apparently claimed as his own contribution. "I helped," he said when Claire raised an eyebrow. "By eating half of them?" Thomas asked. "By not eating all of them," Frank said. "That's a significant contribution." We ate around the kitchen table, Claire's beef stew again, because Thomas had asked for it specifically, which made Claire roll her eyes and make it anyway. Frank opened the Merlot. Thomas found wine glasses in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the ones Diane had bought for dinner parties, and for a moment he held them and looked at them, and then set them on the counter without saying anything, and Claire took them from him and filled them, and nobody said anything about any of it. After dinner, Frank told the story about his brother's dog and the Thanksgiving turkey, a story I had heard at least a dozen times, a story Thomas had heard 4 times, at minimum, a story Claire could recite from memory. It was the story Frank told when he wanted a room to laugh, and it worked every time, because he told it with the absolute conviction of a man who still found it funny after 20 years. Thomas started laughing before the punchline. He tried not to. He pressed his mouth together and looked at the ceiling and lost the battle completely when Frank got to the part about the neighbor's fence. Claire covered her face with her hand. "I laughed the way you laugh when you haven't laughed in a while, and your body has to remember how." Afterward, when the dishes were done and the wine was mostly gone and Frank had fallen into a comfortable near silence in the armchair by the window, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I looked at the 3 of them, Thomas leaning back in his chair, Claire turning her wine glass slowly in her hands, Frank watching the small lopsided tree blink in the corner, and I thought about a woman who had spent 3 years building a plan to take this from me. This table, these people, this particular quality of silence that means everyone in the room is comfortable enough not to need to fill it. She had come so close. "Merry Christmas, Harold," Frank said from the armchair without opening his eyes. "Merry Christmas, Frank," I said. Vince unlocked the side door of Leary Leather at 8 o'clock on the morning of December 26th. The street was empty in the way. Streets are empty on the day after Christmas. A particular kind of quiet, like the city is taking a breath before the new year arrives to complicate things again. The harbor was flat and gray beyond the end of Exchange Street, and the cold was the clean, uncomplicated cold of late December, the kind that asks nothing of you except to acknowledge it He was standing at the workbench when I came in, but he wasn't working. The bench was clear. He was just standing there with his arms at his sides, and on the bench in front of him sat the burgundy leather bag inside a clear plastic evidence sleeve, sealed with a label I could read from across the room. Evidence CR-2025-1847. Portland, PD. We looked at each other for a moment. Evelyn said they'd collect it this morning, Vince said. I know. I crossed the room and stood beside him looking at the bag. I wanted to be here first. We stood in silence for a moment, the two of us in the bag between us and the smell of leather and old wood that had been the smell of this room for 26 years. I almost didn't call you, Vince said quietly. When I found it, I almost just put it back, told myself it was none of my business. I looked at him. What made you call? He was quiet for a long moment. I kept thinking about what it would look like if I didn't. If I put it back and you... He stopped. I kept thinking about it. He picked up his coffee mug from the corner of the bench, turned it in his hands. I'm not a brave man, Harold. I'm just a man who couldn't not make that call once I knew what I was looking at. That's what brave is, I said. He looked at me sideways, skeptical the way he looked at structural claims he wasn't fully convinced by. I mean it, I said. You did the right thing. Everything else that happened, it started with that call. Vince set the coffee down. He picked up a clipboard from beside the bench and handed it to me, the receipt for evidence transfer, my name at the top, a line for my signature at the bottom. I signed it and handed it back. We stood there a moment longer. You doing all right? He asked. Better than I was, I said. Getting there. He nodded. That was enough for him. I walked back out through the side door into the December cold, and I stood on the pavement and looked through the front window of the shop at the burgundy bag in its clear evidence sleeve, sitting on the workbench under the lamp. A leather bag with a stuck zipper. I only wanted to fix the zipper, I thought, and it saved my life. I drove to the harbor on the morning of the 30th because I didn't know where else to go, not in a lost way. In the way that certain places hold certain kinds of thinking, and this one, the commercial pier on 4th Street, the lobster boats and the flat pewter water, and the gulls that cared about nothing, except what was directly in front of them, had always been where I went when I needed to hear myself think clearly. I parked and walked to the end of the pier. The cold was clean and direct, the way December cold in Maine is direct. It doesn't negotiate, it just arrives and tells you exactly where you stand. A man was unloading crates from a lobster boat at the far end, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this particular task so many thousands of times that it had become a kind of meditation. He glanced up when I walked past. Cold morning, he said. It is, I said. As supposed to warm up Thursday. I'll believe it when I feel it. He laughed a short, honest laugh and went back to his crates. I walked to the end of the pier and stood with my hands in my pockets and looked out at the harbor. I thought about 43 years. Not all of them at once, that would have been too much for any one morning, but pieces. The kitchen table Diane and I had argued about for 3 weeks in 1987, before agreeing on a color that neither of us fully loved and both of us grew to prefer above any other. The summer, Thomas was 8 and fell asleep in the back seat driving home from Acadia, with his face pressed flat against the window. Claire at 22, calling me from her first apartment to tell me the stove didn't work, and then calling back 10 minutes later to say she had figured it out herself, and the particular pride in her voice both times. I thought about what had been real, and I decided, standing at the end of that pier with the Atlantic wind in my face and the lobster boat behind me and the city of Portland visible through the gray morning haze, that more of it had been real than I was inclined to credit in my darker moments. Not the last 3 years, but before that, there were decades of ordinary life that had been exactly what they appeared to be, and those decades had produced Claire and Thomas, and a house I knew by feel in the dark, and a neighbor named Frank who wrote things down in a spiral notebook because he thought the truth mattered. That was a life, not the one I thought I had, but a real one. The man at the crates finished loading his truck and drove away. The pier was empty except for me and the gulls. I stood there until the cold had thoroughly made its point. Then I walked back to the car, started the engine, and drove home. Still here, I thought, watching the harbor shrink in the rearview mirror. That's not nothing. That's everything. Claire and Thomas arrived at 7 with groceries and wine, and the deliberate good cheer of 2 people who had decided, without discussing it, to make the evening what it needed to be. Thomas took over the kitchen speaker. Claire took over the stove. I was handed a glass of Merlot and gently redirected to the living room, which I accepted without argument. By 10 o'clock, the house was warm and smelled of garlic and rosemary, and the specific kind of comfort that only comes from a kitchen being used by people who love each other. I sat by the window and listened to them talk in the kitchen, Thomas telling a story about something that had happened in Boston, Claire interrupting to correct a detail he was getting wrong, Thomas insisting he wasn't, Claire laughing. At 10:30, I slipped away to my study. The fireproof box was in the bottom drawer where it always was. I opened it and found what I was looking for near the top, a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper folded in half. I didn't need to unfold it. I knew what it said. Layer 1, Layer 2, Layer 3. I had written those words on the second night of October, sitting in this same chair with Diane asleep upstairs and the whole weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me like something physical. I had written them as a promise to myself, 3 things I needed all at once beyond any possibility of denial. I held the page for a moment, then I dropped it into the wastebasket. It made no sound at all when it landed. From the living room, Claire's voice, "Dad, come on, it's almost time." 1 second. I called. But I sat there a moment longer, in the quiet of the study, the lamp burning warm beside me. I thought about a burgundy leather bag with a stuck zipper, about Vince who couldn't stay silent, about Evelyn who thought in structures, about Frank who showed up every Thursday with a chessboard and a notebook and no fanfare whatsoever, about a zipper that stuck on exactly the right morning. "Dad," Thomas this time louder. 20 seconds. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the study and down the hall toward the sound of my children counting down. They had left a glass for me on the side table. I picked it up. 10, Claire said. 9, Thomas said. At midnight, Thomas put his arm around my shoulder, and Claire leaned her head briefly against mine, and outside on Westbrook Drive, someone was setting off fireworks that lit the December sky in brief, bright colors. "Happy New Year, Dad," Thomas said. I put my arm around him. "Happy New Year," I said. "Both of you." We stood at the window for a while, the 3 of us watching the light. I've lived long enough to know that family revenge isn't a story you see in movies. It's quiet. It hides behind shared meals, familiar voices, and doors you never thought to lock. Looking back, I made one mistake that almost cost me everything I trusted completely, and I stopped paying attention. Don't be like me. Don't wait until a stuck zipper becomes the thing that saves your life. My personal opinion, love isn't an excuse to be blind. You can love someone fully and still keep your eyes open. A good heart doesn't mean a careless one. I believe God puts small signs in front of us every day, a broken zipper, a name, overheard a drawer, left open an inch too far. The question is whether we're humble enough to notice. If this story made you think about the people you trust, the things you've overlooked, or perhaps your own home, I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to follow more stories like this, subscribing means a great deal. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. A note before you go. The stories that follow contain certain fictional elements constructed entirely for educational and reflective purposes. If that's not what you're looking for today, no hard feelings, step away and find something that suits you better. But if you choose to stay, I promise to make it worth your time.